Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News focusing on the search for MH370. I'm Jeffrey Thomas and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Germany. Good morning, Richard.
And good afternoon, Jeffrey.
Now, today we're going to be taking your questions. But before we do, we've got a little bit of an update on Armada 7806. We haven't forgotten about her. And Richard, you've got some information.
Yeah, we're showing a screenshot of the position of Armada 7806 earlier this morning. And as you can see, it's rounded uh, Africa and had a couple of days stop in Cape Town. And it's now well on its way to the next stop in Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. And I guess from there we'll be heading to Europe. So obviously business in the North Sea or the Baltic somewhere.
Yes, and we're going to keep a tab on all the Armada boats because it may well be they send a different ship back for the search resumption, hopefully early November. So,
Indeed.
on to the questions. Jeff Daniel, 81.4. As a retired radio engineer, I'm amazed that this issue is even a debate. All devices capable of transmitting should be turned off. And Barks Country Farmhouse, question: how exactly do electronic devices like cell phones and laptops interfere with aircraft systems? What is the specific mechanics? Best channel on aviation out there. Great job and thank you. And from Rob Barton, 7972, Richard, 1 megawatt transmitter and long wires in the aircraft, a perfect receiving antenna. The body of an aircraft may not provide as much shielding from low frequency radio signals as it does for VHF and other radio waves. All that has to happen is that the large radio frequency signal induces excessive voltages to flow in the wires. This could upset the low voltages in modern microchips. Obviously sounds like he knows his stuff.
Indeed. And they're all great comments and to very good questions. So, first of all, to the mechanics or the mechanisms involved, um, there are radiated emissions, conducted emissions, and then susceptibility of equipment and wiring, which I think Rob was talking about. And the wiring of an aircraft is a perfect antenna. So you're quite right on that score. On average, airlines experience a 83% load factor and a weighted average of the number of passengers on board each flight is 180. So that's the number of seats. You multiply it by 83%, you get about 150 passengers on each aircraft flight. And 99% of airline passengers have at least one personal electronic device, 90% have two, and 75% have three. So a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, a smartwatch, a game console, earbuds. There's a string of devices that people will carry with them. And each cellular transmitter, the older ones historically could transmit up to 2 watts. Modern ones are about zero point 0.2 watts. Wi-Fi was up to 1 watt, is now down to 0.1 of a watt, and Bluetooth is also around 0.1 of a watt. So my personal mix will be a laptop, a smartphone, and buds, and 1 cellular, 2 Wi-Fi, and 3 Bluetooth running. So I would be 0.7 watts in total. And if I had 150 passengers with me, altogether, if we left all of our devices on, that would be 105 watts. So we're not talking about HEH with 1 megawatt, but bear in mind we are only sitting between 3 meters and 70 meters, depending on the length of the aircraft and where you're sitting, from the cockpit and the avionic bays. And bearing in mind, as Jeffrey said yesterday, there is wiring in the ceiling, in the sidewalls, and under the floor, and they're all susceptible to electromagnetic interference. So there's a lot of fog, a lot of going on if we all were to leave our electronic devices. Now, there has been several tests done, and conducted and radiated emissions are evaluated. There's a document from an organization called RTCA, document number DO-307, and that tells you exactly how they measure all of these interferences. And, just a simple measure, say, of 105 watts at an average of 37 meters from the cockpit, that is 6.1 milliwatts per square meter of power density. For example, Captain Sahari Shah left his Nokia Lumia 925 connected to his WeChat messaging, whilst MH370 was lined up on the takeoff runway 32 right at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. HEH at 1 megawatt was 163 kilometers away from Qantas 72. So the power density there, 3 microwatts per square meter. But all in all, I think Jeff is right when he says no debate on this.
Yes, indeed. So, Steve Graham, 9979, you touched on the air crash at Christchurch Airport, New Zealand. I worked for several years at Christchurch Airport. My home has a view up the east coast. The evening of the crash, there was a cloud of ground fog that rolled in from the sea just north of New Brighton. The fog proceeded west across the city, but I could not see it anymore when the sun set. I have no reason to assume it did not continue across the city after it became dark. There was higher cloud, the level which the airport was monitoring. I suspect that the pilot was expecting to descend through the cloud layer at the level where he would be able to see the airport lights. This did not happen because the fog had by this time reached the approach he was on. He descended through the cloud and on through the ground fog and hit the trees. I still have the same view and have never seen sea fog roll in the way it did that night or since. That is my little truth of what could have happened that Friday. I've always wondered how soon after the crash did the ground fog reach Christchurch Airport.
Well, thank you for that, Stephen. And the official report into the crash confirms what you said about the weather. The light rain and fog, partly cloudy to overcast. Visibility was very limited, reduced to approximately 800 meters and sometimes dropping down to just 500 meters. The cloud base was very low, stratified cloud layers between 100 and 400 feet. So you wouldn't have seen the lights. And the approach would have then been completely an instrument approach, and the ILS would have been used. And these conditions match the official weather reports from the time, and the approach weather was given by the air traffic control and noted the 800-meter visibility max and the reducing in drizzle to 500, and noted the cloud cover down to 100 to 200 feet and overcast at 400 feet. So, even more reason not to be distracted as a pilot during approach in bad weather and poor visibility by making a call on your mobile phone. The approach started at 1904, and the only call, as we mentioned, was from the pilot, which started at 1904:36 and continued for 3 minutes and 9 seconds during the approach. And you can well ask the question, how is it possible that a pilot is on the phone during approach in bad weather and low visibility? And I think here there's also no debate about the poor weather from what you say, and no debate about using mobile phones during a landing.
Unless there's something we don't know about the circumstances of that crash, that decision to use a mobile phone by the pilot with that weather forecast was an appalling dereliction of duty, I would have thought.
Yeah, and the report points that out.
Does it? Okay. But there are other debates, Richard, in aviation and in general, and MH370 in particular. In aviation, who is in command, the pilot or technology? In MH370, who was the perpetrator and why? Was there a controlled ditching or a high-speed impact? Bill Kramer, 2994, comments on the Transair flight, the RDS 810, and asks, once again, the forest is missed for the trees. Why pilots, happened before, can't even tell what engine is damaged, or speculation as to why. In this tech age, these airline can't put a buzzer light flashing in the cockpit to indicate which engine is damaged and readout of symptoms. Mind-boggling. But this, I might remind Bill, was a 50-year-old aircraft, 737-200, and more modern aircraft have corrections to these issues, although there are exceptions.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference. So, for example, we went through Air France 447, and there were a whole bunch of cautions and warnings that went off in the middle of that flight. The record, but for sheer volume of alerts and cautions and warnings, is actually Qantas Flight 72 again. That incident back in 2008 with a modern Airbus aircraft, there were over 400 electronic monitoring warnings, caution and warnings going off in a period of 4 minutes. They were displayed in rapid succession. Many were repeating or cascading, and making it impossible for the pilots to address them in real time. So they had stall warnings, flight control computer faults, the autopilot disconnecting, overspeed alerts, underspeed alerts, multiple system reconfiguration messages. They were bombarded with alarms, and many of them contradicted each other. There were visual, auditory, and tactile stick shaker warnings, all activated nearly simultaneously. The captain later described the experience as complete sensory overload. The severity of the alerts distracted the pilots from the core flying tasks, such as evaluating the aircraft pitch and airspeed through a manual or backup systems. So, yes, it's nice when a light goes on in the cockpit, But when you get 400 in 4 minutes, what are you supposed to do as a pilot?
And talking of Qantas, another one of their incidents, which was QF32 out of Singapore and A380 Nancy Bird Walton en route to Sydney when the engine exploded and ripped holes in the wing. This was a Rolls-Royce issue. It wasn't a Qantas issue, it was a Rolls-Royce issue. And they had 50 ECAM messages that they had to work through, and it took them approximately 2 hours to get that aircraft back into a landing configuration. So certainly overload. Anyway, we move on. Little Android 75. Hi guys, I love your work. Continue your work. I have the following questions. Question: as far as we know, after the captain hijacked the plane, one of the first things to do was to turn off the transponder. Please correct me if I am wrong, but if the transponder is off, the TCAS will not work. This means that you will not be able to see other planes in the vicinity, as well as they will not be able to see you. On the other hand, I watched a video where it was stated that after the U-turn at Agari, the captain or the hijacker was carefully manoeuvring through the Malacca Strait, avoiding in-air collisions with other aircraft. The question is, how is that possible without the transponder and in the dead of night without the ability to see through the cockpit? Thanks.
Yeah, well, little Android, you're perfectly correct. When the transponder is off, the TCAS will not work. So on one hand, you hide yourself from others, but then you can't see others on the TCAS either. And that's why I think the transponder was switched back on from time to time on a temporary basis to have a look-see what other traffic was in the vicinity. But even on a moonless night, when you take the view out of the cockpit window, you can see the stars, and if it's clear, and you can see navigation lights from other aircraft. You can also see the lights of towns and cities down below, or if you're over the water, you can see ships and fishing vessels. So you get a pretty good feel of where you're at and what is going on around you. And sometimes you get lighting everything up. Or if you're going over the poles, you get aurora lighting stuff up. So you have a pretty good situational awareness, even without the transponder.
And particularly in the tropics, you'll get plenty of lightning at night as the whole sky lights up. It's quite spectacular. Ian, 1959, thank you for your thorough coverage of MH370. What do you think about the idea of air marshals having access to the cockpit in an emergency like this? Maybe a unique code that overrides everything. Once the captain was deliberately stopping the co-pilot from re-entering the cockpit, providing this scenario is correct, must have been obvious Sahari was up to no good. At that point, an air marshal should be able to access the flight deck and immobilise the captain or the hijacker. And small wonder, thank you both for your tireless pursuit of the truth, not completely related to this search, but rather to preventing future hijackings and other onboard madness or takeovers. I had thought about having someone else in the cockpit. It's all very fine being able to bolt the door so people can't break into the cockpit, but what if something's amiss is happening in there and no one can access it to mitigate the danger? Is there now any way for the cabin crew to alert outside interests like nearby planes or ATC that their plane is in jeopardy? I can't bear to think these people flew for hours being unable to save themselves or alert anyone to their predicament. Surely we need an SOS system of some type. Perhaps it changes from flight to flight that can be activated in an emergency outside the cockpit. Keep well and sincere thanks.
Yeah, well, both comments, great ideas on allowing an air marshal with a secret code to override the cockpit door if it's closed. Or, for example, we've talked in previous episodes about putting a SATCOM phone in the galley at the rear of the aircraft as an alternative communication system to the ground. We've talked about air marshals before, and there are many air marshals, especially in the US and the UK and Australia. And in the US alone, there are around 3,000 air marshals, but they have to cover 45,000 flights per day. So you can see the coverage is only going to be around 5%. Many countries rely completely on the pre-departure screening, in-terminal patrols, and some airlines provide security teams for in-flight protection, but that's by no means all airlines. And sometimes in some countries, there's only really a token security.
Yeah. Sam Rains, if the airline is owned by the government, is it normal or even allowed for one of their pilots to publicly criticise them on social media like Sahari did? I figured this would be flagged as an integrity and safety issue. We know Sahari was a respected and experienced pilot, but that doesn't mean he still liked his employer. Prior to the disappearance, MAS had suffered financial losses, cutting routes, fleet changes and business reset and restructuring. Seems like there was a lot of bureaucracy and change going on for MAS in the 2011 to 2013 period. Annual reports show there was an emphasis on improving safety and integrity for the airline. Is it possible the motive was both political and work-related, a disgruntled employee? That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, I think you actually at one point wrote an article on this aspect and criticizing the airline that you work for. And I think you called it a red flag and it should have been dealt with.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic. And if a Qantas pilot had done the same, I think he might have been quite firmly spoken to.
So Mike Denton, 1056, possibly Captain Shah originally planned to divert the plane on the earlier flight to Jeddah, but may have been unsuccessful in getting all the other pilots out of the cockpit at the same time. It certainly would have been easier to accomplish, as much of the flight would have been outside of radar tracking.
Yeah, and good point, Mike. I've actually written a post on my website titled, "Was the original target MH370 or MH150, which was the flight to Jeddah?" We're including a link to that post below. The maximum radar coverage is around 200 nautical miles from Malaysia, and again within 200 nautical miles of Saudi Arabia. You do cross over southern India on that route, so you will come back in radar range and then go back out. But you're quite right, over the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, the aircraft will then be on oceanic procedures, issuing position reports every hour or at designated reporting points, and completely out of sight of radar at those points. So there's about 2,500 nautical miles over the ocean and out of sight of radar.
Yeah. So Queen Domo Fethel podcast 4662. Here's the issue with the FBI simulator data. Aside from it coming from an unplugged hard drive, so it could have been placed there by anyone. And from it being a ghost copy of the original, so could have been compromised by the Malaysian investigation. The family have said the flight simulator wasn't working and was faulty for the last few months, and that the captain hardly used it. And the data was odd, and the flight wasn't flown to the southern Indian Ocean or landed for practice, as it was entered manually and fuel was zeroed out. So to simply create a set of coordinates in the southern Indian Ocean and fuel exhaustion without any actual sim or flight practice, that seems unlikely a pilot would do that, as the only benefit is to FBI, who are trying to suggest a specific location, or for the pilot to know the exact coordinates to spoof a location. That's it.
Thank you, Queen Domo, for that long list of insights. And you're quite right. It was an unplugged hard drive, but that doesn't mean someone else planted it. It was copied as a secure backup, but that doesn't mean to say the Malaysian authorities manipulated it. The family is correct. There were numerous software crashes, and the captain was frustrated by the software problems. He visited several websites and wrote several emails trying to fix the software crashes. And I agree with you, the data was odd. Flying to the southern Indian Ocean with a Boeing 777 until fuel exhaustion. Another simulation the captain did was to a remote airport in Canada, a mining town in northern Canada, with a DC-3. And, that was quite a challenging airport and challenging approach through the mountains. So I can understand the interest in doing that, but I find it odd flying to the southern Indian Ocean to fuel exhaustion. I also agree the waypoints in the southern Indian Ocean were entered manually, including altitude changes manually, and the fuel was jettisoned during the simulator run to match fuel exhaustion. I disagree that the FBI were trying to suggest a crash location. And I disagree that the pilot ran the simulation to be able to spoof the location. But you raise an interesting set of points.
Yeah. So we've got Gandalf. The ditching of hijack 767 just off the beach was another example of how badly a ditching under fairly ideal conditions can nevertheless go wrong. And GCCG 76, nice report, gents. I do have a question. Is there any data you guys can analyse in regard to how long it took for the plane to be entirely submerged? I do believe the engines having no power will give more chances of a better ditching, and would this make sense? The Ethiopian Flight 961 hijack plane that landed near the beach, were the engines running? More than one question, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough to have more than one question. The Ethiopian flight ETH 901 ditched after the loss of both engines due to fuel exhaustion, and as you mentioned, just off the beach in the Comoros Islands. An optimum ditching is, however, with engine power. You have a better control of the descent and the final flare. The pilot can control the descent rate and the direction parallel to the swell along the valleys between the waves and into the wind much easier when he's got engine power. And a nose-up attitude is also important during the final flare to reduce impact speed. A commercial airliner will submerge in between 5 minutes and 30 minutes. US Airways flight AWE 1549 on the Hudson took 24 minutes to sink. ETH 901 sank immediately, trapping some of the passengers inside, unfortunately.
Lee Newcomb, 85. Once again, great work from you both. Fascinating stats. It does clearly show that ending up in the sea is not straightforward and different aspects of each crash. I think the Hudson was incredible from the pilot on that occasion. Thanks for sharing. Love all your episodes and look forward to the next one again. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lee. And I agree with you. The Hudson River landing was incredible. And thank you too for your kind words.
So Ian Bufferham, 4006. Hi, Richard. You obviously have a lot of powerful software to carry out the whisper calculations. Can you tell me the predicted accuracy of your calculations? How accurate is the predicted track of the aircraft likely to be in terms of plus or minus kilometres?
Yeah. Well, using WhisperNet to detect and track aircraft is quite accurate, but only to the nearest 30 kilometers. The reason for that is you only get WhisperNet data every 2 minutes, and an aircraft at 500 knots can travel 30 kilometers in 2 minutes. All the calculations can be, to six decimal places, but that doesn't help you when you only get data every 2 minutes.
Phil Bartlett, 7898. Great program as always, Jeffrey and Richard. Can I ask a question, please? Assuming the 777 broke into pieces when it struck the surface and the pieces descended to the seabed, is the remotely operated equipment able to get right down to that ocean floor to gather up the pieces, even though some might be quite large? Thanks, Phil in Staffordshire, England.
Well, Phil, good question. An ROV can operate all the way down to the seafloor, also in depths of 4 or 5 or even 6,000 meters. The robot arms can lift a weight up to 600 kilos, so they're quite strong. But if it's a bigger item and a heavier item, like an engine core, you may then need a heavy duty crane. And the Ocean Infinity Armada fleet are equipped with heavy duty cranes and have a deck loading capacity of over 1,000 tons. So they could theoretically recover quite a lot of wreckage and bring it to shore.
Well, viewers, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Thank you, Richard, for all the work you've done on these questions. Viewers, tomorrow we are having a very interesting episode. Can AI find MH370? I think you'll find that absolutely fascinating. So viewers, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to us, please like us, and please keep those comments coming. We do sincerely appreciate them. And also, of course, we love the questions as well. And don't forget, challenge us on something you might like us to explore in greater detail. So thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Thank you.